Hi, ESL. So today we're going to jump into our reading He Was No Bum by Bob Greene that we've been preparing for this week with some of our background activities and knowledge. First, I would like to go over something called PTSD, which is going to be a topic that's going to be covered in this story. So PTSD stands for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. So I'm going to read to you a little bit about that. So it says post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a mental condition that can result from a life-threatening experience. Someone can get PTSD after being in a war or a serious accident. Until recent times, PTSD was called shell shock, and people thought it was only caused by wartime experience. People who are in a natural disaster or who are violently attacked can also suffer from PTSD. People with PTSD often have nightmares and flashbacks about the experience. They can have difficulty sleeping. They also can feel as if they don't fit in with other people anymore. These symptoms can make it very difficult for people with PTSD to lead a normal life. PTSD can lead to alcohol and drug abuse. People with PTSD often have family problems. They may not be able to get and keep a job. Some people have even lost their homes as a result of their problems. Men, women, and children of all ages can suffer from the disorder. About 30% of the men and women who have been in war zones suffer from PTSD. About 8% of men and 20% of women who witness life-threatening events will develop PTSD. And roughly 30% of these people will suffer with it throughout their entire lifetime. So this is important knowledge to keep in mind as we jump into our story, He Was No Bum by Bob Greene. So let's go ahead and get started with our story. A bum died. That's what it seemed like. They found his body in a flop house on West Madison Street, Chicago's Skid Row. White male, approximately 55 years old. A bum died. They didn't know. He was no bum. And his story, well, let his story tell itself. The man's name was Arthur Joseph Kelly. Growing up, he wanted to be a firefighter. When he was a child, he would go to the firehouse at Aberdeen in Washington, the home of Engine 34. His two sisters would go with him sometimes. The firefighters were nice to the kids. This was back in the days when the neighborhood was all right. Arthur Joseph Kelly became a teenager and then a man, and he never quite had what it takes to be a firefighter. He didn't make it. He did make it into the Army. He was a private in World War II, serving in the European Theater of Operations. He didn't make out too well. He suffered from shell shock. It messed him up pretty badly. And this is a photograph of Chicago. This is actually called the L train, which a lot of people use every day to go to and from work. He was placed in a series of military hospitals, and then, when the war was over, in veterans' hospitals. Whatever had happened to him in the service wasn't getting any better. He would be released from the hospital and he would go back to the old neighborhood in Chicago. And suddenly the L train would come rumbling overhead and Arthur Joseph Kelly would dive to the ground. Some people laughed at him. He didn't want to do it. A loud noise and he would drop. He walked away from a veterans hospital in 1954. He decided that he had to live in the real world, but he was in no condition to do that. He tried for a while, and then he went back to the only place that he remembered as being a place of happiness. He went back to the fire station at Aberdeen in Washington. Some of the men of Engine 34 remembered Arthur Joseph Kelly from when he was a boy. They remembered him as a bright-eyed child wanting to be a firefighter, and now they saw him as a shell-shocked war veteran. They took him in. They fed and clothed him and gave him a place to sleep and let him be one of them. He wasn't a firefighter, of course, but he lived in the firehouse, and he had the firefighters as his friends. The military people didn't know what to do with his veterans' benefits, so some of the firefighters went to the Exchange National Bank and arranged for the benefit money to be paid to a special account. The firefighters of Engine 34 took it upon themselves to become Arthur Joseph Kelly's conservator and guardian. The years went by, some of the firefighters were transferred and some retired and some died. But there was always at least one firefighter at the station who would take responsibility for Arthur Joseph Kelly. The firefighters didn't ask for anything in return, but Kelly would stoke the furnace and clean up and help out as much as he could. There were maybe a dozen firefighters over the next years who became his special guardians, the ones who would deal with the bank and the military and who would make sure that no harm came to Kelly. For a long time, it was the Sullivan brothers. When they left Engine 34, another firefighter willingly took over, and then another. Once Arthur Joseph Kelly went to a Cubs game. A car backfired. He hit the ground. There was some snickering, but an older man who had been in the service himself and was familiar with shell shock helped Kelly up and said, "That's all right, fella. You'll be all right." After that, Kelly stayed close to the firehouse. His mind and his nerves were not good. The firefighters had to remind him to bathe and to change clothes and to eat properly. They did it for 20 years and more without anyone asking. "He's an easy-going fellow," one of them said. "He doesn't harm anybody. It's not so hard for us to take care of him." Then the firehouse closed down. The firefighters were transferred to another station house at Laughlin and Madison. Arthur Joseph Kelly went with them, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the firehouse he had loved as a child. He didn't want to live there. So the last firefighter to take care of him, George Grant, a 51-year-old father of 8, found Arthur Joseph Kelly a place to live. It wasn't much. It was the room on Madison Street, but every month Grant would take care of the financial arrangements with the bank and would go to Madison Street to give money to a lady who ran a tavern near Kelly's room. The understanding was that she would give Kelly his meals at the tavern. No liquor. The firefighters didn't want Kelly to end up as a Madison Street wino. The firemen had started taking care of Art way before I could even get on the force, Grant said. "I just happened to be last in a long line of men who took care of him. I didn't mind." When Arthur Joseph Kelly was found dead in his room, they thought he was a bum, but they should have been at the funeral. Arthur Joseph Kelly was buried with dignity. He was carried to his grave by uniformed firefighters. They were his pallbearers. Most of the firefighters were not even born when, as a boy, Kelly had started hanging around the firehouse. But they were there at the end. The firefighters never let Kelly live like a bum. They didn't let him die like one either. So this story really is a lot like a eulogy to Arthur Kelly. So a eulogy, and that's the word that they mention right here, is a story that you tell about the life of someone who has recently died. So the firefighters in this story would like everyone to remember Arthur Joseph Kelly as not just a bum who lived off of other people, but as a very sensitive and wonderful person who did his best every day to help others.